Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Hello everyone, before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. The days that followed were a whirlwind for Mark. He barely had time to process the decision he'd made, but one thing was certain: his life was about to change forever. A few days later, he found himself standing outside the gates of Eleanor Brooks' estate, a place he had never imagined stepping foot in. The sprawling mansion in front of him was a stark contrast to his modest apartment in the city. Its tall, white columns and polished stone facade gave off an air of unspoken wealth. He could barely bring himself to believe that this was now his reality. He had agreed to marry Eleanor, but even now, as he stood at the gate, he wasn't sure what he had gotten himself into. The gate opened with a quiet hiss as a uniformed butler ushered him in, and Mark couldn't help but feel out of place. His jeans and jacket felt inadequate in comparison to the grandness of the house, and he suddenly realized just how little he knew about Eleanor. As he walked down the long driveway, the weight of his decision grew heavier. What kind of woman was Eleanor? He had agreed to marry her, but for what? To escape debt? To change his life? Was this really the solution to all of his problems, or was he just digging himself deeper? Mark's thoughts were interrupted when he finally reached the front door, which swung open before he could even knock. Eleanor stood there, her striking presence unmistakable. She wore a fitted navy blue dress that accentuated her elegance, and her silver hair was pinned up in an intricate style that spoke volumes about the care she took in her appearance. But it was her eyes that caught Mark off guard. They were kind, but there was a layer of distance behind them. It was as if she was constantly guarding something Mark couldn't quite figure out. "Mark, welcome," Eleanor said, her voice calm and composed as always. "Come in. I'll show you to your room." She led him through the grand entrance, and Mark couldn't help but stare in awe at the interior. The house was immaculate, gleaming marble floors, chandeliers hanging from the high ceilings, and walls adorned with art that looked more like museum pieces than mere decorations. As they walked, Eleanor explained the rules of the house. It was clear she valued privacy and control. She spoke of the expectations: how he was to keep their arrangement a secret, how there would be no public displays of affection, and how their roles as husband and wife would be purely contractual. It all felt surreal. Mark was led to a room on the second floor, the door opening to reveal a large, tastefully decorated suite. The bed was king-sized, draped in luxurious linens, and the room was filled with soft, warm lighting. It felt like a hotel room, not a home, and for a moment, Mark felt a pang of sadness. He missed his small apartment, the little corner of the world where he had built his life. As he set down his suitcase, Eleanor gave him a polite nod. "Dinner will be at 7. I'll have the staff bring something up for you if you need anything before then." She turned to leave but paused at the door. "Mark, I know this may all seem strange to you, but I hope you understand this is a mutual arrangement. There are no strings attached beyond the financial security I'm offering. We both need this." Mark nodded, though he wasn't sure if he truly understood. The weight of her words lingered in the room as she closed the door behind her, leaving him alone with his thoughts. He sat down on the bed, still trying to make sense of everything. Was he really prepared to live in this strange world, bound by an agreement rather than love? Was this really the life he wanted? At 7 o'clock, Mark made his way downstairs for dinner. He was greeted by the staff, who led him into a grand dining room. The table was set with fine china, and the soft glow of candlelight flickered across the room. Eleanor was already seated at the head of the table, her demeanor as poised as ever. She smiled as he entered. Please, sit. We have much to discuss. As they ate, the conversation remained businesslike. Eleanor asked about Mark's studies, his future plans, and his goals. But there was something about her that made him uneasy. She seemed so composed, so controlled, as if she had all the answers, and yet, there was something she wasn't telling him. He could sense it, but he couldn't put his finger on what it was. Her guarded nature made it clear she had her own secrets, and as the night wore on, Mark found himself wondering if he was just a pawn in her carefully crafted world. He didn't know how long he could live like this, pretending that everything was fine when all he wanted was to feel like he truly belonged somewhere. After dinner, Eleanor excused herself, and Mark was left alone with his thoughts once more. He walked back to his room, his mind racing with questions. He had agreed to this arrangement for his own survival, but the more he thought about it, the more it felt like he was losing pieces of himself along the way. What would his life look like if he stayed? Would he ever feel at home in this world that felt so foreign to him? Only time would tell, but one thing was certain: his life was no longer his own. It was now tied to Eleanor's, in ways he could never have imagined. The next few days passed in a blur for Mark. He went through the motions, trying to adjust to his new life under Eleanor's roof, but everything felt surreal. Every corner of the mansion was perfect, too perfect, and the silence between him and Eleanor was deafening. They rarely spoke unless it was necessary, keeping their interactions strictly professional. Eleanor had made it clear from the beginning that their marriage was a business arrangement, and Mark tried his best to adhere to that. But as the days went by, he couldn't help but feel an unsettling emptiness inside him. One afternoon, Mark was in the library, attempting to study for his upcoming exams. The large, open space was lined with bookshelves that seemed to stretch on forever. Despite the grandeur of the house, there was a stillness in the air that made it hard for Mark to concentrate. His thoughts kept drifting to Eleanor. She had been so composed, so distant since their agreement. What did she want from him, really? Was she hiding something, or was she just as empty as he felt? Just then, he heard the soft sound of footsteps approaching. Eleanor appeared at the door, her presence as commanding as always. "Mark, there's an event tonight," she said, her voice calm but firm. "It's important. I need you to attend with me." Mark looked up from his books, surprised. He had been expecting another quiet evening, just like the ones before. An event? What kind of event? "A charity gala," Eleanor explained, her eyes meeting his. "It's crucial for my reputation, and I need you by my side." "It's part of the deal." Mark nodded, though he still felt uneasy about it. He had agreed to the arrangement, but this was the first time he would have to step into her world fully. He wondered what kind of life Eleanor lived outside their home, the world she was a part of. Was he just a pawn in her game, or was there more to their arrangement than he understood? That night, Mark found himself in a tuxedo, standing beside Eleanor in the grand ballroom of a luxurious hotel. The lights were dim, and the room was filled with people laughing, talking, and exchanging business cards. Mark felt out of place, like a fish out of water. His hands were clammy, and his mind was racing. He had never been to a gala before, let alone one of this magnitude. Eleanor stood beside him, looking like she belonged in the sea of wealthy elites. She was effortlessly beautiful, her silver hair styled perfectly, and her dress, a sleek black gown, hugged her figure in all the right places. She smiled and exchanged pleasantries with several important figures, her demeanor flawless. Mark tried to keep up, offering polite smiles and nods, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was a part of a world he didn't understand. Throughout the evening, Mark found himself drifting between conversations, trying to find his place in this world of high society. He didn't belong here. But then something unexpected happened. Eleanor was pulled into a conversation with a group of businessmen, and for the first time since their arrangement began, Mark was left alone. As he wandered to the edge of the room, he found himself staring at a large painting hanging on the wall. It was a beautiful piece, full of emotion and raw energy. For a moment, he forgot about everything: the gala, the deal, and even Eleanor. He stood there, lost in the painting, when a soft voice broke his reverie. "You're the new husband, right?" a woman asked, stepping up beside him. Mark turned to find a middle-aged woman, dressed in a luxurious emerald gown, smiling at him. Yes, Mark stammered, unsure of how to respond. "I'm Vanessa," the woman said, extending her hand. "I've heard a lot about you. Eleanor's been very open about her new arrangement." Mark felt a pang of discomfort. He hadn't expected anyone to talk about their marriage so openly. "It's not like that," he said quickly, trying to defend himself, though he wasn't even sure what he was defending. "It's just an arrangement." Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "Is that what you tell yourself?" She looked him up and down before adding, "You know, Eleanor doesn't let anyone close to her. You must be special." Mark was taken aback by her words. Was he special to Eleanor? He didn't know. He wasn't sure if he was even close to understanding her. Before he could respond, Eleanor appeared at his side, her eyes narrowing slightly as she glanced at Vanessa. "Vanessa," Eleanor said with a polite but firm tone, "Mark and I are here to enjoy the evening. If you don't mind, I'd prefer not to discuss personal matters." Vanessa gave a small, teasing smile and nodded, disappearing into the crowd. Mark turned to Eleanor, feeling a mix of gratitude and frustration. "Thank you for that," Mark said, his voice quiet. Eleanor didn't respond immediately. She just looked at him for a moment, her eyes searching his face. Finally, she spoke, her voice softer than usual. "You're not like the others," she said, almost as if to herself. Mark didn't know how to respond. He didn't know what she meant by that, but something in her tone made him feel like maybe, just maybe, there was more to this than just a business deal. As the night went on, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing between them. But whether it was for better or for worse, he had no idea. The days that followed the gala were filled with uncertainty. Mark continued to live in the mansion, his life becoming a strange mix of routine and tension. He woke up every morning in the luxurious suite that Eleanor had provided for him, surrounded by wealth he had never imagined. He tried to bury his feelings, focusing instead on his studies and the role he was expected to play in Eleanor's world, but it was becoming harder to ignore the growing discomfort in his chest. Every time he saw Eleanor, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her than the cold, calculated woman he had initially met. Something about her eyes, the way she would sometimes pause just before speaking, made him wonder what she was hiding. One evening, as he sat at the dining table eating alone, Eleanor walked in, her usual composed self, but today there was something different in the air. She had a certain unease about her that Mark couldn't place. She had always been a picture of control, but tonight, her steps were heavier, and her usually confident posture seemed to waver for just a moment. Mark watched her closely, curious. She noticed his gaze and paused before sitting down across from him. "I need to talk to you," Eleanor said, her voice steady, but there was an underlying tension. "It's about the arrangement." Mark put his fork down, his heart racing. He had been waiting for this moment, but now that it had arrived, he felt a knot in his stomach. "What about it?" he asked, trying to sound calm, though the uncertainty in his voice betrayed him. Eleanor took a deep breath before responding. "I've been thinking. I never wanted this to be uncomfortable for you. I know this wasn't your ideal situation." She looked away for a moment, as if gathering her thoughts. "But you have to understand, I did this for a reason. And it's not just about your debts. It's about something more." Mark frowned, not sure if he understood what she was implying. Was she trying to tell him something more personal? Or was this just another part of their arrangement? "I don't know what you mean," Mark said quietly, his eyes narrowing. Eleanor met his gaze, her eyes softening for the first time since he had known her. "You see, I've spent so many years building an empire. And in the process, I lost myself. I was so focused on power, on control, that I forgot what it meant to be human. To feel, to connect." Mark's heart skipped a beat. Was she saying what he thought she was saying? "I don't expect you to understand," she continued. But I need you to know that when I agreed to this, it wasn't just about securing my future. I thought I was doing what was necessary. I thought I could keep my emotions at bay, but it's harder than I thought. It's difficult, Mark. For the first time, Eleanor seemed vulnerable, her voice laced with something that almost sounded like regret. Mark felt a strange pull in his chest, a mix of sympathy and confusion. He had never seen her like this, uncompromising, yet human. His mind raced with questions, but he kept quiet, unsure of how to respond. Eleanor, Mark began, his voice gentle, you don't have to do this alone. I'm here, you know. Eleanor shook her head slightly, her gaze flickering with something between hope and sadness. I've always been alone, Mark. And I thought I could handle it. But lately, things have been changing. And I don't know what that means. I don't know what this arrangement is becoming. Mark looked at her, seeing a side of her he had never expected to see. She wasn't just a businesswoman. She wasn't just a woman of power. She was someone who had built walls around herself, perhaps to protect her heart. And now, for the first time, those walls seemed to be cracking. He reached across the table, his hand resting gently on hers. We're in this together, whether we like it or not. But that doesn't mean we can't figure things out. You don't have to carry all of this on your own. Eleanor's eyes softened, and for a moment, she didn't pull away. She just sat there, looking at him with a mixture of surprise and something deeper, something that might have been trust. After a long pause, Eleanor spoke again, her voice quieter this time. Maybe you're right. Maybe I don't have to do this alone. The air between them shifted, the tension finally easing just a little. There was still uncertainty, still a long road ahead of them, but for the first time, Mark felt like they were both on the same page. This wasn't just about a contract anymore. It wasn't just about money or debt or survival. There was something else at play now, something neither of them had expected. And as the evening continued, Mark couldn't help but wonder what would come next. What did this mean for them? Would they continue down this path, or was something more waiting for them both, hidden behind the walls they had so carefully built around their hearts? Only time would tell, but one thing was clear: the arrangement was changing. And so were they. The following weeks felt like they were stretching out into eternity for Mark. Eleanor had seemed more distant after their conversation, though she no longer held herself with the same emotional armor. She still maintained a certain distance, but Mark could tell she was thinking, reconsidering, perhaps even re-evaluating their arrangement. He, on the other hand, found himself caught between confusion and curiosity. He had entered this agreement for financial stability, but now, as the days went on, he realized there was more to it than just money. He was beginning to wonder if he had misjudged Eleanor. There were moments when she would let her guard down just enough for him to see glimpses of something deep, a vulnerability, a hint of fear, a crack in her otherwise perfect exterior. One evening, Mark sat in the study, his textbooks spread out before him, though his focus was far from the material in front of him. His mind kept wandering back to Eleanor and their growing connection. He hadn't expected she hadn't expected to be pulled into her world, her emotions, or even her life. He had assumed he would be just another figure in her grand design. But now, he was unsure. Every time he looked at her, something in him stirred. She had become more than just the woman who had saved him from his debts. She had become someone he cared about. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a knock at the door. Eleanor's voice came through the crack, calm but firm. "Mark, can we talk?" Mark looked up, his heart skipping a beat. "Sure, come in." Eleanor stepped inside, looking as composed as ever, though there was something different in her eyes, something that betrayed the calm facade she always wore. She didn't sit down, instead standing near the door as if hesitant to enter the room fully. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice softer than usual. "About everything. About us." Mark's heart raced. Was she about to say something important? Something that would change everything? "I've been thinking a lot about why I agreed to this arrangement," she continued, her gaze fixed on the floor for a moment before looking up to meet his eyes. I needed security, yes. But I wanted control. I thought I could control everything, including my emotions. But now, I'm not so sure. Mark felt a strange sense of relief mixed with confusion. She was opening up to him, but was this a sign of weakness, or was it the beginning of something real? I didn't expect you to be so, Eleanor hesitated, trying to find the right words. Different. I didn't expect to connect with you like this. Mark stood up from his chair, unsure of how to respond, but wanting to be close to her. Eleanor, she raised her hand, a small gesture to stop him. No. Let me finish. You've been kind to me, even when I didn't deserve it. You've been patient, and you've stayed true to your part of the deal. But I think we both know this isn't just about the deal anymore, is it? Mark opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. The truth of what she said hit him like a wave, and for the first time since their arrangement started, he realized how deeply involved he had become. It wasn't just about survival. He had started to care about Eleanor. I never wanted to fall for someone like this, Eleanor said quietly. I built walls around my life for a reason. I didn't want anyone to get close enough to hurt me. But with you, her voice trailed off as if she didn't know how to finish the thought. Mark took a step toward her, his voice soft. You don't have to be alone, Eleanor. You don't have to carry this weight by yourself. Eleanor's eyes softened, and for a moment, the hard edge that had always been there disappeared. She took a deep breath and nodded. I know. I've always been so focused on doing things on my own, but I think I need someone now. And maybe that someone is you. The room was silent for a moment, and Mark could hear the faint sound of his own heart pounding in his chest. He had never imagined that this woman, this powerful, distant woman, would open up to him like this. It was like watching the walls around her crumble, piece by piece. He couldn't help but wonder if this was what he had been searching for all along, someone to share his life with, someone to understand the weight of his struggles. Before he could speak, Eleanor stepped closer to him, her hand brushing lightly against his. I don't know what this means for us, she whispered, her voice full of uncertainty. But I know I don't want to let go of what we've started. Mark's hand closed around hers, his heart steadying as he looked into her eyes. Neither do I, he said softly. For the first time, Eleanor smiled, and it was genuine, a small but significant moment that spoke volumes. It wasn't just about money, power, or survival anymore. It was about them, and the bond they were beginning to form. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, but peaceful. They stood there for a moment, each of them lost in their own thoughts, but connected in a way that neither of them could deny. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, it felt like they were on the same path. As Eleanor stepped back, her hand still in his, she nodded. We'll figure this out together. No more walls. Mark nodded in return, a sense of calm washing over him. Together. And for the first time, both of them believed it. As the days passed, something shifted between Mark and Eleanor. The walls that had separated them, both physically and emotionally, began to crack. They spent more time together, not just in the grand halls of the mansion, but also in the quiet moments when they were alone. Eleanor, who had once been a fortress, was slowly letting him in. The distance that had defined their relationship began to fade, and with it, the lines between business and personal became harder to distinguish. For Mark, it was a constant push and pull. He had come into this arrangement expecting it to be purely transactional, but now, as he spent more time with Eleanor, he found himself questioning what they really were. Was this still just a business deal, or was something more growing between them? One evening, after a long day of meetings for Eleanor, they found themselves sitting on the terrace, the sound of the city's night hum in the distance. Eleanor had poured them both glasses of wine, the red liquid reflecting the soft glow of the lanterns. Mark sat beside her, the warmth of the wine and the cool breeze making him feel more relaxed than he had in days. You've been quiet, Eleanor remarked, her gaze fixed on the skyline ahead. Something on your mind? Mark hesitated for a moment. He had been thinking about the growing bond between them, how much closer they had become in such a short amount of time. But he wasn't sure if it was the right moment to say anything. After all, what was this really? He couldn't deny the feelings that had begun to surface, but Eleanor was still a mystery to him in many ways. "I've been thinking a lot, actually," Mark finally said, his voice soft. "About everything, about us." Eleanor turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "What about us?" Mark swallowed, unsure of how to phrase it. "I know this started as a business arrangement, but I don't think it's that anymore. At least, not for me." Eleanor's eyes softened, and she set her glass down on the table beside her. "You're not the only one who's been thinking," she said quietly. "I didn't expect this to happen. I didn't expect to feel anything. But here we are." Mark looked at her, his heart racing slightly. "So what does that mean?" Eleanor took a deep breath, her eyes searching his face. "I don't know yet. But I think it means we've crossed a line. A line that we can't go back from." Mark's mind raced. They had crossed a line. That was undeniable. But where did it lead? He had spent so much time thinking about what he was supposed to do next, but he had never really stopped to think about what he wanted. What he felt for Eleanor was real, but what did that mean for their future? "I don't know where this goes either," Mark admitted, his voice quiet. "But I can't pretend that I don't care. I do." Eleanor didn't respond right away. She just stared at him, her gaze intense, before she leaned back in her chair, looking out at the city again. "I don't know how to let myself care. I've spent so long building walls around myself that I don't even know how to tear them down. But I think I'm ready to try. With you." Mark's heart skipped a beat at her words. He had known that this was more than just a deal for him, but hearing Eleanor say it out loud made it real in a way he hadn't expected. They were both taking a risk now, stepping into uncharted territory. "I want to try too," Mark said, his voice steady. "But we need to be honest with each other. No more walls. No more pretending." Eleanor nodded slowly, her lips curving into a small, thoughtful smile. "Agreed," she said softly. "No more pretending." The air between them shifted, becoming heavier with unspoken understanding. For the first time since they had met, Mark felt like they were truly on the same page. The business arrangement that had brought them together was no longer the focus. It was the possibility of something more, a chance at a real relationship, built on trust, honesty, and mutual respect. As the night wore on, they talked more freely, sharing thoughts and feelings they had kept hidden for so long. The walls were still there, but they were no longer insurmountable. For the first time, Mark felt like they were no longer strangers. They were partners, taking tentative steps toward a future neither of them had expected but both were beginning to embrace. When the conversation eventually faded into comfortable silence, Eleanor turned to him once more. "Thank you," she whispered. Mark met her gaze, his heart swelling with emotions he hadn't realized he was capable of feeling. "Thank you, too," he replied, his voice thick with emotion. And in that moment, they both knew that this was just the beginning of something new, something real. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, neither of them was afraid to walk it together. The days that followed felt different for both of them. Mark and Eleanor, once trapped in a transactional arrangement, now found themselves navigating the delicate waters of a new, deeper connection. They spent more time together, their conversations no longer just about business or their initial agreement. They shared personal stories, little bits of their pasts that had always been hidden behind carefully constructed facades. Mark learned about Eleanor's early life, the sacrifices she had made, and how she had built her empire from the ground up. Eleanor, in turn, learned about Mark's family, the struggles he had faced after his father's passing, and how he had always felt like an outsider, never quite belonging. The more they talked, the more their connection grew, but with that came a rising tension. They were both beginning to realize that this was no longer just a marriage of convenience. It was something more. But neither of them knew exactly how to define it. One evening, as they were sitting in the library, Mark noticed that Eleanor was quieter than usual. She sat with a glass of wine in her hand, her gaze distant. He had learned to read the subtle signs when she was lost in thought, when something was weighing on her. "Eleanor," Mark said softly, breaking the silence. "Is something wrong?" Eleanor looked up, her expression a mixture of weariness and something else, something he couldn't quite name. She set her wine glass down and leaned back in her chair, her eyes meeting his. "I've been thinking," she began, her voice low. "I know we agreed to keep things simple, to stick to the arrangement, but I don't know how to ignore what's happening between us. It's hard to pretend that this is just a business deal when everything inside me says otherwise." Mark's heart skipped a beat. He had been feeling the same way, but hearing Eleanor admit it out loud made the weight of the situation hit him full force. He wasn't imagining it. This wasn't just a convenient arrangement. It had turned into something real. "I've been thinking the same thing," Mark said, his voice steady but his heart racing. "I can't pretend either. I don't know what this means for us, but I can't ignore how I feel. I care about you, Eleanor." Eleanor's eyes softened, and for a moment, the walls she had built around herself seemed to crumble just a little bit more. She took a deep breath and smiled, but it was a bittersweet smile, one filled with a hint of sadness. "I care about you too, Mark. More than I thought I would." There was a long pause as they both processed the weight of what they had just said. Eleanor stood up slowly and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. Mark followed her, standing just behind her, unsure of what to do or say next. He wanted to reach out, to close the distance between them, but he hesitated, unsure if he was ready for the vulnerability that came with it. "I didn't plan for this," Eleanor said quietly, still staring out the window. "I thought I could control everything. I thought I could stay detached, but you've made it impossible to stay distant. And I'm afraid." Mark stepped closer, his voice gentle. "Afraid of what?" "Afraid of losing control," Eleanor replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Afraid of giving too much of myself to someone else, only to have them leave. I've spent my whole life building walls, Mark. And now you're tearing them down, piece by piece, and I don't know how to stop it." Mark reached out, his hand brushing lightly against hers. "You don't have to stop it," he said softly. "You don't have to be afraid anymore. We can figure this out together." Eleanor turned to face him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of doubt. She found none. And for the first time, she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of something real between them. She stepped closer to him, her hand reaching up to touch his face. "I want to believe that," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But it's hard. I've been alone for so long, Mark. I don't know how to trust anyone anymore." Mark's heart ached at the vulnerability in her words. He had no idea how to make her feel safe, but he knew he wanted to try. "You don't have to do it alone anymore," he said softly. "I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere." Eleanor's breath hitched, and for a moment, the room seemed to stand still. She looked into his eyes, searching for the truth in his words. And in that moment, she found it. She stepped into his arms, and as they held each other, the world outside seemed to fade away. For the first time, they both realized that this wasn't just a business deal, a contract, or an arrangement. It was something more. It was love. And even though they didn't know what the future held, they were willing to face it together. As the days passed, Mark and Eleanor's bond continued to grow stronger. The walls that had once defined their relationship, walls built from fear, ambition, and control, began to crumble, revealing something neither of them had expected. A connection. A real one. It wasn't just about the arrangement anymore. It wasn't just about the contract that had brought them together. It was about them, the two of them, learning to trust, to be vulnerable, and to love. They spent more time together, sharing moments of laughter and silence, finding comfort in each other's presence. But despite the progress they had made, there was still one thing hanging over them, a shadow that neither could ignore. The morning after they had shared that intimate conversation on the terrace, Eleanor received a call that would change everything. The call was from her lawyer, informing her that a meeting had been scheduled to finalize the details of her estate, a meeting that would involve her family, the people who had once been a part of her life but who she had long since distanced herself from. Eleanor had always been the one to keep her family at arm's length, never letting them get too close, never allowing them to interfere in her carefully constructed world. But now, the time had come to face them. "Mark," Eleanor said, her voice low, as she stood in front of the window, looking out at the city. "There's something I need to tell you." Mark, who had been working at his desk, looked up at her, his expression one of concern. He could see the tension in her posture, the way her shoulders were tense, the way she avoided looking at him directly. "What's going on, Eleanor?" he asked, standing up and walking toward her. Eleanor took a deep breath, her hands gripping the back of the chair in front of her. "It's about my family. They've asked to meet. And I don't know if I'm ready for that. I've spent so many years keeping them out of my life, keeping them at a distance. And now, I'm being forced to face them again." Mark stepped closer to her, his hand gently touching her shoulder. "You don't have to do this alone, Eleanor. I'm here. Whatever happens, I'll be by your side." Eleanor turned to look at him, her eyes filled with gratitude, but also fear. She had built her empire on the belief that she didn't need anyone, that she could do everything on her own. But now, as she faced the prospect of reconnecting with the people who had once been so close to her, she realized how much she had closed herself off. And how much she had come to rely on Mark. "I don't know if I'm strong enough to face them," she said quietly, her voice breaking slightly. Mark pulled her into a gentle embrace, holding her close. "You are," he said softly. "You've been strong for so long. And now, it's time to let someone else be strong for you." Eleanor leaned into him, her head resting against his chest. She hadn't realized how much she had needed to hear those words until now. She had spent so many years pushing people away, convincing herself that she was better off alone. But Mark was different. He was the one person who had never judged her, never expected her to be anything other than who she was. And now, as they stood together, she felt a sense of peace that she had never known before. The meeting with her family was scheduled for the following week. Eleanor knew it would be difficult. She knew that facing them would bring up old wounds, old betrayals, and perhaps even more questions about her past that she wasn't ready to answer. But she also knew that she wasn't facing it alone. She had Mark. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. The night before the meeting, Eleanor and Mark sat together in the living room, the soft glow of the fireplace casting shadows on the walls. They didn't need to say much. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with an understanding that neither of them had to explain. Eleanor reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark looked at her, his eyes full of warmth. "I know. But you're not alone. I'll be there tomorrow, right by your side." Eleanor nodded, feeling a sense of calm wash over her. For the first time in years, she felt like she could face whatever came her way. She wasn't doing it alone. And with Mark by her side, maybe, just maybe, she could start rebuilding the parts of herself that she had buried for so long. As they sat there, hand in hand, the future felt uncertain, but for the first time, it didn't feel scary. Together, they could face anything. The next morning, Eleanor stood before the full-length mirror in her bedroom, her reflection a mix of determination and uncertainty. Today was the day. The day she would face her past, her family, and all the things she had buried deep inside for years. Mark stood behind her, his presence grounding her in a way she hadn't expected. He had been there for her through everything, and now, as she prepared to take the first step toward mending the relationships she had long avoided, she couldn't help but feel the weight of his support. "You look beautiful," Mark said softly, breaking the silence. His words were simple, but the sincerity in his voice made her heart swell. Eleanor turned to him, a small smile tugging at her lips. "I'm not sure beautiful is the word I would use for today," she replied, her voice laced with nervousness. But I'm ready. Ready to do this. With you. Mark nodded, his eyes warm with understanding. We've got this. You've got this. You don't have to do it alone. Eleanor took a deep breath and nodded. For the first time, she believed him. The anxiety that had been building inside her since she received the call about the meeting was now met with a calm resolve. She had Mark by her side, and that made all the difference. When they arrived at the family estate, the familiar, grandiose house felt strangely cold to Eleanor. It was as if the walls themselves remembered the years of tension, the quiet battles, the silence that had kept them all apart. She stood at the entrance, feeling a mix of emotions: fear, anger, longing, but mostly, uncertainty. She had no idea what this meeting would bring, or if anything could be healed. As they entered the house, Eleanor's family was already gathered in the large sitting room. The moment she stepped inside, her mother's eyes met hers, and for a brief moment, Eleanor felt the old sting of unresolved hurt. But this time, something inside her was different. She wasn't the same woman who had left this house years ago. She was stronger, more open, and she had someone by her side who believed in her. That someone was Mark. Eleanor, her mother said softly, standing up from her seat. It's good to see you again. Eleanor didn't know what to say at first. The years of silence had created a chasm between them that words couldn't bridge. But she knew she had to start somewhere. I'm here to talk, she said, her voice steady. To face the past, and hopefully, move forward. Her family looked at her, their expressions a mix of surprise and guarded hope. There was still so much they didn't understand, so much that had been left unsaid. But Eleanor was ready to speak now. She was ready to confront the truth and the pain that had held her back for so long. As the conversation unfolded, Eleanor found herself saying things she had never thought she could say. She spoke of the hurt, the disappointments, the misunderstandings. She spoke of the walls she had built to protect herself, and how those walls had kept her from connecting with the people she had once loved. And she spoke of Mark, the man who had helped her see the possibility of change, the man who had stood by her side without judgment, without expectations. When it was all said and done, Eleanor looked around the room. Her family was still there, but something had shifted. There was no immediate resolution, no magic words that could heal years of pain. But for the first time, they were talking. And that was enough. As they left the estate that afternoon, Mark and Eleanor walked side by side, the weight of the past still heavy but somehow more manageable. They didn't have all the answers. They didn't know what the future held, but they knew they would face it together. Mark looked at Eleanor and smiled. How do you feel? Eleanor glanced at him, her heart full. Strangely, relieved. Like a weight has been lifted. I still don't know where everything goes from here, but I know I'm not alone anymore. Mark squeezed her hand. And you never will be. As they walked away from the estate, hand in hand, Eleanor realized that the road ahead wasn't easy, but it was theirs to walk. Together.